Hello everybody, this is the Doctor. Welcome back to Star Trek Online. I wanted to make this video in the light of a comment that I made in the last video that was published. I said this game is a DPS promoting game, or this game promotes DPS. I just wanted to kind of flesh out my thought pattern on that and explain why I kind of think that, after possibly even rethinking that stance, and then reach out to you guys in the comments and ask you the very question, do you think this game promotes DPS? The reason, or my reasoning, why I initially said that is based on my experiences of playing mainly STFs at in-game content, Starfleet Task Forces. This deals with Infected Space Advanced, Infected Ground Advanced, used to be the Elite version, now the Advanced versions. You have Cure Ground, Cure Space, you have Khitomer Accord Ground, Khitomer Accord Space, and then you have the Hive Ground and Hive Space as well. In these STFs, as they are now, and it didn't always used to be this way, but as they are now particularly, Cryptic has introduced time limits into these STFs. Now, if you play the normal versions, these time limits don't apply for failure of the mission. But if you play the advanced version, these time limits are not all optional. Even though the time limit says optional, some of them are not. There might be one that's really is optional, but there's another one that's not. Now, in the Elite versions to come, because I do believe they eventually plan to have new Elite versions of these STFs, every single, quote, optional time limit will not really be an optional. They will be required, else you will fail the entire STF. And as it is now, the Advanced version, which is more difficult than the previous Elite version was, there's at least one optional that is not an optional, and in my opinion needs to be renamed, because if an optional means, well, you have an option to do it or not. But really, on the advanced versions, it's not an option. There are certain things you have to do in the time limit, or else you do fail the entire STF. Now, you get a few points, but you just don't get all your points, and then it ends early, and you get to go home and have a good day. So I think, first of all, the optionals that are not optionals need to be renamed, because it's not an optional. But second, it's really, to me, what it comes down to is a time limit that promotes DPS. Because when you're under a time limit, then the goal becomes completing the task before the timer runs out. So how do you complete the task in Star Trek Online in these STFs before the timer runs out? Well, that generally means killing things or destroying things. If it's not Borg spheres or Borg on the ground, then it's something like taking out the generators or something like that. It's going to involve firepower from your ship or your character on the ground. This both applies space and ground, doing damage to the enemy to destroy them within a time limit. So that means you need to do damage to your enemy, DPS, within the time limit to win, basically. That means if you are a weak player in terms of DPS, or you don't deal a lot of DPS, you keep shooting and shooting and you can't wear down, and it may take you 15 minutes to wear down a Borg cube. If you're like that, well, then you will not win the time limit and you will fail. So that means you need to increase your damage. And in that way, you take down that cube a lot faster, and then you win the time limit. So that, to me, promotes DPS. These time limits promote the character and the player having and doing more damage faster to complete the goal. If you've ever jumped into some of these, it could even be in a pug. Sometimes you'll get somebody who's really high DPS, and they will just blow through everything like it's nothing. well, they complete the time limits and complete the mission and win the STF. So they have high DPS, and it works for that goal. Somebody else who maybe doesn't have high DPS, it may take them longer, but the time limit will run out, and then you fail. So if there was not a time limit, if there was some other factor, some other challenge, but not a time limit, then I would say DPS, this is not a DPS promoting game, because at that point it doesn't matter how long it would take to wear down a cube or a sphere or whatever. You would just do it and then complete the mission. So if there were no time limits, then I would say DPS just don't matter. But really, for these STFs, Cryptic has made DPS matter. It matters whether we want to think it does or not. At least for that content, and I think that's where I need to separate my thought pattern here. At least for that content, and I think it is based on per content. Just depends what you're doing. If you're playing the STFs and there's a time limit to complete a goal, then the more damage you do means you complete that goal faster and you win. Now that doesn't apply to all the content in the game. For example, the storyline content. If you go to the actual storyline mission content, Klingon War, Wasteland, Romulan Mystery, Cardassian Struggle, Borg Advance, Breen Invasion, all these things here, this is the mission content. Well, you can get away with not being an op elite DPSer on the storyline missions because there's no time limit, you see. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to wear down the enemy and win the mission because there's no time limit. You can sit there for an hour in your chair at your computer and just enjoy the journey and the experience of the missions. You're under no pressure via time to complete them. So that means you don't have to worry so much about how much damage you're dealing. You can be a healer. You can be support. You can play with other team members and play that support role that you want to play, maybe as an engineer or as a science character. You can do those different things. You don't have to be the super duper elite tactical guy who kills everything with one shot in the storyline content. It's not necessary because there's no story, there's no time limit. So that means you can play the game exactly how you want and not have to worry about, focusing so much on the damage that you're doing. So that is, I think, the separation there. It really depends on the kind of content you're playing in Star Trek Online. If you are playing just the storyline missions and you're not concerned about the in-game content, or you don't want to do any of the Borg STFs or any of the, the newer things that have time limits, then really you can play those roles. You can play the support, the healer, all that stuff quite well, and not have to worry too much, and you can just have fun. And that's how, of course, how everybody experiences the game when they start, because you don't start with the STFs, you start with the storyline missions. So you start with that journey and that experience. But then when it comes to in-game, it kind of changes. You have this reversal, you have this changeover where maybe you need to focus a little more on those type of things, because you do want to be an asset to your team when you're in these STFs. You don't want to be the lame duck who just, sits there and dies and blows up all the time. You want to contribute. That's the whole point of these STFs, is you want to have a fun, good experience, but at the same time, you got to contribute a little bit too. You can't just leech off of the other players, which happens more often than not. But it becomes, there is a point you can become over paranoid about DPS, and there's a fence, I think, about being a DPS quote elitist, where that's all you're focused on is DPS, and you end up getting to the point where you make fun of or chastise other people who may not have as much DPS as you, and you get angry with them, and you think you are above them and they're beneath you. If you ever get to that point in your thought process, you've gone too far too. So you can definitely cross that line and go the other end on DPS. You don't want to be that guy, right? Be helpful. Help other people. If somebody is not doing, very good damage, don't yell at them. Don't be mean. Help them. Ask them kindly, Are you having any problems with your build, or would you like any suggestions or help to make your build better? And then help them. That way, when they play the next STF, they will be a better player, they will have learned, and then they can pass that on to somebody else and help them as well. And then we just have a wonderful player base. So help people. If you see someone, out there struggling, don't just yell at them thinking that they don't know anything. I mean, ignorance can be a real issue, and it shouldn't be shunned. I mean, I was ignorant when I first started playing this game. I didn't know anything. I mean, I had to learn over time. Everyone has to learn over time. You don't start off on Star Trek Online just knowing everything and knowing how to make a good build and use it well. And that's another thing, is using your powers well, hitting the right buttons at the right time. A lot of people prefer auto fire, a lot of people don't. That can definitely affect your damage. I tend to like auto fire just because I can just spam the space bar and I don't have to really think about if I'm firing phasers or torpedoes. I know I'm firing everything when I hit the space bar. So things like that can affect your damage as well. So just kind of think about those things. But I just wanted to flesh my thought process out on that to let people know what I meant by Cryptic promoting DPS in the game. It's the time limits in the STFs, I feel, that promote DPS. And at in-game, you're going to find yourself playing like nothing but STFs over and over and over again. So, that's a big part of the in-game there. I think a better way to do it is maybe take away the time limits. I think they really should. I think the optionals or requirements or whatever should be changed not into time limits, but like task. Like, for example, take out an X amount of ships to complete the optional, or save X amount of people off the station, or task-oriented goals, I think, should be the optional instead of a time limit. That number one makes it a little more challenging, but it also gives other careers a chance to do other things in STFs. For example, if one of the tasks were to save 10 people off the station and infected space advanced, there's a space station down there. Let's say the task is save 10 people off the space station before a certain event occurs or whatever. Then not a time limit, but let's say before the generators are destroyed or something like that. Then a support character could help you there. A science person could keep you healed while you go down to the station and beam those people out if like attack cube is on your butt. Or you can have an engineer, give you shield heals or support you in some fashion as you go rescue those people down there. It would give the other careers tasks to do other than just, having to beat a clock. So that's how I think they could change it. That would make the game definitely not DPS oriented, but more class oriented. It would make it more possibilities for support role, for healing roles, for other roles in the STFs. So as it is now, I believe it's the clock, the time limit, that makes it DPS oriented, because you gotta kill things fast to get through it. I think they should change that to task-oriented events. That's my opinion. But what I want from you guys is feedback on what you think of all that. Do you think Star Trek Online is a DPS-oriented game? Do you believe that time limits are the way to go? Do you like the idea of maybe a task-oriented things, optionals to complete rather than time limits? And just get all your opinions on that. I just wanted to flesh that out, put that out there. Get your opinions on that. I think I will post a link to the forum in Star Trek Online to get more people involved on this topic, to really talk about this, and maybe we can even get Cryptic in on this. Maybe they'll listen, maybe they'll see this, read the comment thread, because I would love to see their reactions to this. I really think moving away from a time limit in the STFs to task-orientated events where you need to complete tasks instead of time limits is probably the better way to go. And I really urge Cryptic to look into that sort of thing for STFs and in-game content rather than time limit. That's my thoughts. That's where I'm going to leave this video. I encourage comment and feedback. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.